Hey beautiful people, my name's Kristen. Thank you for stopping by my channel to hear about my reading wrap up for the month of February. And even though it was kind of a shorter month, well, not kind of, February is the shortest month, I still managed to do a lot of reading. I just found myself a lot of times waiting. It was a lot of oil changes and doctor visits and just all that stuff, and I just take my book and make it into a quite enjoyable experience. For me, it's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll wait another 15 minutes, no problem, I got another chapter to read. So I wanted to start out sharing about Barack Obama's book that he wrote for his daughters, Of Thee I Sing, and it is beautifully illustrated. He didn't do the illustrations, but it's just basically a celebration of the diversity of America, and each page kind of talks about a different either famous person or event in American history, and basically says that we're all part of history, which I love that concept, right? And so if you have a child, or just sometimes children's books are appropriate even for us adults in those things, this is lovely. I'm glad I picked that up and bought it. I don't think that president wrote his own memoirs, but I know there's several biographies on him, and I will get to that eventually as I'm working my way through my presidents. Speaking of history, I did pick up a couple shorter books for Black history reading. The narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, who was a slave turned abolitionist. I have a complete separate, more in-depth review and discussion on this, as well as, oh, where'd my letters go? Hold on. It's little and fell off the stack. My letter from Birmingham Jail from Martin Luther King. I will leave a link or card to these reviews, but basically this is a letter that Martin Luther wrote to white, I don't know that they were Catholic priests, but to the church, talking about their response to his protests and search for equal rights. And it was a beautiful pairing, and these are both pretty short books, and they're easy to read in length, but not as easy to read in content as far as the difficulty of the subject, but very informative, very helpful. Highly recommend both of those. Going along with I consider those classics too. Also in the classic realm, I did read JRR Tolkien's Simarillion. This is 5 short stories that are prequels to the Fellowship and Lord of the Rings. So it tells some backstories, particularly around the magic Cimmerils, the creation of the world, the power and nature of gods, and all those kind of stuff. It gives a lot of backstory to the older characters that we know and love, Gandalf and Galadriel and Elrond and several of those. So check it out if you have any interest in that. I think if that's your first reading of Tolkien, I would not recommend that. Definitely start with The Hobbit and go through that story and then backtrack and read the other. I also read for my nonfiction, along with that, Tolkien's modern readings. I did separate reviews for these, which I'll also leave a link below. But this was a college text reading for a friend's son-in-law, and he thought it was so good, and so she bought it for me for Valentine's. And it is basically looking at the writings of Tolkien, or not the writings of Tolkien, but the readings of Tolkien within 50 years of his life, which would be modern to him. So what did he read, and how did that influence him, either directly saying that this influenced him, or you can make very good conclusions of he encountered these stories that had this kind of feel, and this is in his writing. So it likely was an influence into his life. Again, if you like his writings, it's very interesting. Nonfiction, read Dare to Be Kind, Lizzy Valequez. She is a woman with TED Talks, YouTube videos, really, really inspirational on her story. She was born with a genetic disease that it's difficult to gain weight, to, just kind of look normal, but this is normal for her, and just processing that and dealing with that, and just her heart and compassion and the way that she has shaped her lives to become a famous motivational speaker. Beautiful, inspirational, great read for February. And to kind of round out my nonfiction, I did get to Santa Ana of Mexico, Will Fowler. So this is a pretty good comprehensive biography, all the way from where he was born and growing up all the way through to his death and burial and final words and all that kind of stuff. And my purpose in reading this was coming back to Texas. I loved Texas history growing up, just was very passionate, very proud of my state and state history. Santa Ana equates right up there with Hitler for me, because as the president of Mexico who marched his armies and took down the Alamo, that's just kind of how Texans are raised. And so I wanted to go ahead and be fair and see if I liked him anymore or learned anything else about him. And I have a lot, probably more respect, and he was so brave and so courageous. He, even when he was in leadership, he was first and foremost a soldier. In fact, he was absent from his political office a lot of times. He would just appoint somebody else that he trusted to do all that. He did not want to deal with all of the laws and regulations. He wanted to be making a difference on the battlefield. He was always noted to be first in, last out kind of thing. He ended up losing a leg later on after the Alamo and continuing battles. And it was interesting, his history of going in and out of popularity, actually being exiled and kicked out of his country, but then being asked to come back and lead again, depending on who was in power. Fascinating to learn more about history in that respective. But I don't like him as a person. I mean, the person who's kind of that impassioned, fight kind of person sometimes can rub me the wrong way, because they can be cruel, right? They can be tyrants, and they're good at what they do. That's what makes them good generals and war sergeants and all that kind of good stuff. But I always have a compassion, kind side that struggles with that. So I did appreciate learning more about particularly the chapter around Texas Alamo, and I am learning a lot more about the laws and taxations and reasons why the Texans rebelled, including the outlawing of slavery in Mexico and the Mexican territories, which Texas was. And so a huge part of why they were fighting back was the taxes, but particularly saying that they couldn't have their slaves and not pay them and not treat them as equal. And that was not something at that point the United States was even ready to, and even the United States yet, right? So anyway, fascinating, really thoughtful, really glad I read this. If you have any interest in that Mexican or Texas type of history, you might find that one interesting and worth your while. Now, I do want to say that I had an author reach out to me and send me a free copy of his book for review, but this is my honest feedback, and I think you should listen. Evan Witmer wrote How to Burn This Book, and it's really, really clever and cute. I think you can kind of read. It actually gives the instructions on the front of the book about how to read it. It's a collection of 10 short stories followed by 1 to 4 or 5 pages about why that story should be the one that enrages you to go ahead and burn the book, and you hold it here and you light it here, right? So if you liked like that whole Tim Robbins Jitterbug Perfume kind of Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy, that kind of really fun but kind of satire, kind of nonsensical in some regards, kind of like where you're going, what? This does that very, very well. It has stories that takes off about aliens. It has drunken brawl parties where the liquor bottles all are the narrators and talking. It has things where it's making maybe not political statements, but just statements to our culture and the nature of it, and kind of going over the top, right? It's like, whoa. So if you enjoy that kind of thing, which I think a lot of my viewers, based on what I've watched you read, you might like this one. So I recommend it, especially because it's divided into several smaller ones. You may pick one up in between a heavy read if you've been reading a lot of war and heavy kind of things that kind of are difficult for my heart, this is actually a fun alternative. Ooh, sorry, didn't mean to hit the camera. Fun alternative to go through. So I recommend that. Good job, Evan. I would like to look up some of your other writings as well. Then for my new release, I always try to do the classic, the nonfiction, and the new release. So the new release, I usually am just going with Book of the Month Club because that's the most economical way for me to get new releases. And if it's still good, I had a coupon that they emailed me for your first book for $5. So I'll try to put a link to that if it's still good. Otherwise, it's $9.99 for your first book. So this one was The Golden Couple, and honestly, when I bought this, I was just in a hurry picking out my February, and I thought this was a romance, and I thought that was good for February. It's not. It's a thriller. It's basically a marriage that is on the brink of falling apart because of infidelity, and a non-traditionalist counselor who has actually lost her license. They go to her as kind of a last resort, and she has not unethical but unusual means of counseling and really getting into people's heads and lives and whatnot. And so we learn a lot about her backstory, and it was really, really good. There was a lot of crossover between characters that it was fun to try to figure out some things and if they were connected or not. Some things you could kind of get a clue on, but in the end, there were still things in the end that was being revealed that I thought was good and interesting. So totally a fun book. A definite 3.5, bordering on 4 stars. Not one that I couldn't put down, but a good fun read. And then for spin number 5, book number 13 in my list was a romance. So I said, hey, that fits into the plan of reading it within the time frame of spin 5. So I had this Love Songs and Other Lies, Jessica Pennington. This is a Dollar Tree book that I got, and it is the story about teenagers, young love, and she has had a breakup, and he shows up. She gets roped in by her best friend to be on a tour bus for a band concert that's going to be filmed, like back in the day when MTV was filming those Battle of the Band kind of shows where they got rights to a record. I think O-Town was maybe the last one that I watched was that the early 2000s? I think it was the early 2000s. Anyway, it reminded me a lot of that, which I thought was good fun back in the 2000s. And her ex shows up on the tour bus, and so that's the premise of it. It's going back in time to when they were a couple to now, and to the band contests, and so it has a little Daisy Jones and the Six as far as that kind of stuff. It also has the reality TV, kind of the one to watch feel. I really liked it. I was surprised by how much I liked a Dollar Tree $1 book that is just a silly little romance. So I also at the Dollar Tree had picked up Romeo and What's Her Name, another teenage romance story, and the premise is that the girl has tried out and become the understudy for Juliet, and her high school crush is the boy who's playing Romeo, right? So I like that. I did theater in college. I really thought this would be good, but this read so cheesy and campy, and it was focused entirely on the crush and the relationship with nothing else making it any deeper. And I felt like I was reading the script for Saved by the Bell, which I like Saved by the Bell and those kind of shows like those, silly teenage kind of things, but I wasn't in the mood for it. With so many other books that I had that I wanted to read, I was just like, oh no, I can't do that. But if you have somebody who likes that style of writing, or is younger, preteen, really wants to read a cute crush only focused story, I think it was adorable. I read about 35 pages and I just couldn't. And then to kind of round off my romances for February, because I'm not a huge romance person, but I figured February we're going to go for it. And I like this one. It was set in Ireland, which is another one of my favorite things to read, is books set in Ireland. So Love and Luck. It is the story of a family who goes over to Ireland. The girl has just had a bad break up with her boyfriend that was the love of her life, kind of first love kind of thing, and she finds a tour book that takes you through the tour stops of Ireland and gives you assignments on how to get over being heartbroken. And so there's adventures where she's kind of at odds with her brother and she's trying to work through some of that. He's got another quest going on. She's trying to have some closure. And I really like the way they weaved the spots and tourist spots of Ireland and had actual excerpts of the tour book and what to do before each chapter where they'd encounter whatever it was that they were visiting and doing. And so I really, really like that. So that one was actually really, really good too. I had 2 or 3 people out there in YouTube book land that told me that they like that and that there's a whole series. So I might have to look up some of the other ones. I think the other one's Love and Gelato, maybe Italy. I'll have to check into that. And then the last book that I finished in the month of February was Neal Shusterman's Thunderhead, and this is the second in the Scythe series. It is also a book that the main kind of narrators of the story are the teenagers, but it has multiple levels of those who have gone forward into a perfect world where there is no longer any death. Nobody dies from cancer, nobody dies from war, so nobody dies. So to do population control, they create this realm or class of Scythes, who have to take, I'm thinking Star Wars, who have to decide when your time has come and take you down. You can even regenerate yourself to be younger. If your body gets too old, you can actually choose to have a turning and go to a younger age again. So it's a fascinating concept and just the moral dilemmas of it, and it is just fast-paced. You're trying to go along multiple levels of government. You're also getting to hear firsthand the artificial intelligence thought, because the cloud has become the Thunderhead. So that's hence the name of the title of this one. So it's fascinating, because you always have those thoughts of, can we create artificial intelligence that becomes self-aware and becomes an entity? And in a lot of our sci-fi, it takes us out, right? It destroys the creator. So I immediately, as soon as I finished this book, I think it's this one's about 500 page book. As second I finished this, I was going online and ordering the third and final one, which has just come in. So even though my TBR for March is long, it is an honorable mention that I'm going to be trying to get to sooner rather than later, because if you're interested in any of the things that I was talking about, this one is really, really good. Bordering 5-star. Depending on how the series ends, it may get up there, but it's definitely a solid 4-star for me. And maybe my favorite thing that I read all month, to be honest. So there you have it. My fairly substantial reads in February. So March, I don't know if I'm going to be getting to wait around as much in the month, but we'll see how I do. Stay tuned for my TBR, which should be coming out, and also adding a book from your choices. So there should be time to jump in if you want. I can try to leave that card below too. You can help me pick a book that I'm going to read next month. Thank you so much for taking time, stopping by, listening to my thoughts and reflections. If you've read any of these, leave me a comment. If you want to read any of them now, I would love to know that and dialogue with you. You have a super awesome day. Happy reading, y'all.